Hello and welcome to the Lewis and Clark State Historic Site. My name is Ben and I'm bringing you another video from our Item Spotlight series. Today's item is this one right here. This is what we call the Espontoon. Sometimes it's called a spontoon or a half pike, but it's usually written in the journals by Lewis and Clark as the Espontoon. Now, this was a symbol of authority. Officers in the U.S. Army would carry this. And so both Lewis and Clark carried one of these with them. Lewis more famously describes them in his journals, but Clark was carrying one as well and actually
uses it to kill a wolf.
These were brought on the expedition, and they were kind of an all-purpose tool for the captains. They made a good walking stick. They could sometimes be used as a gun rest. They helped Captain Lewis keep his balance when he nearly fell over. They could also be used, of course, as a weapon. As I said, Captain Clark killed a wolf with one, and Lewis, whenever he was nearly struck by a rattlesnake, turned his pike and started to stab down at it, reaching out for wherever the rattling sound was coming from until he killed that snake. He also used it to fend off a bear at one moment. A grizzly had snuck up on him while he was out hiking alone. He did not have his rifle reloaded yet, and so he was feeling pretty threatened as this grizzly was coming up on him very quickly. So he ran into the banks of the water along the river and used the point of his spear, his Espontoon, to drive off the bear. The bear left, probably realizing Lewis was more work than he wanted to spend the energy or effort for, and Lewis was saved by the use of his Espontoon. Now, these are all neat stories as to how Lewis and Clark are using this tool on the expedition, especially because here at the Lewis and Clark State Historic Site, the question we usually get about this is, why are they taking an old-fashioned spear with them in the first place? Well, for one, it does turn out to be a pretty usable tool. But more importantly, the Espontoon tells a story about how important military order and rank were in the United States Army in 1803. The early United States Army was kind of this ragtag group of militia and recruits from all over the United States that were all kind of brought into one formal army in Valley Forge. George Washington and other generals that are brought in create a more formal army for the United States, where rank and order and uniform are of much more importance. And it's at Valley Forge in 1777 that George Washington ordered that all the officers begin to carry this Espontoon. And here's a reading from that order. As the proper arming of the officers would add considerable strength to the army, and the officers themselves derive great confidence from being armed in time of action, the general orders every one of them to provide himself with a half-pike or spear as soon as possible. Firearms, when made use of withdrawing their attention too much from the men, and to be without either has a very awkward and unofficer-like appearance, that these half-pikes may be of one length and uniformly made. So that's just a small section of that order, but George Washington wants his soldiers to stand out during a battle. And if they're using their muskets, they're going to look like everyone else in a line as people are getting ready to fire. And he's worried that these officers may be too worried with their own musket rather than making sure that their lines are in order and doing what they're supposed to as they're getting commands from higher up. The Espontoon, of course, will be taller than a bayonet on a musket. Those reach to about here. And so this is a way that the soldiers can pick out where the officers are, because if they're holding their Espontoon, they're going to stand up above everyone else. Officers would also have sabers or swords that they had that also distinguished their rank and that they could use to direct their troops. But at the time of the early Revolution, it was much easier to make a point for an Espontoon and then to make a wooden staff than it was to make the number of swords that they would need. So partly out of a practical necessity and the fact that this does stand out, officers were to carry this when directing their soldiers. Now, this is a great tool because, like I said, it does stand out, but they were all of a standard length. So you could use the length to measure out a camp, make sure that the tents were properly spaced out, make sure that the room between the ranks were measured. This does create a nice straight line. You can make sure your soldiers are in line. You can use the end cap here to maybe knock one of your soldiers back in line if he steps out. And, of course, this can be used as a way to keep soldiers from retreating during the heat of battle. Everything about the design of this Espontoon requires a soldier to think about how he's interacting with the soldiers underneath him. This tool makes you more of an officer because it gives you that purpose and the need to use it. This is a great tool for turning officers into leaders within the Army. This is also taken into use by General Anthony Wayne as well. General Wayne will also insist that all of his soldiers have these. So we know Lewis and Clark would have seen this as a regular symbol of officers when they were just coming up the ranks in the Army. So both Lewis and Clark are bringing these with them. Lewis and Clark know that this is a tool that they will need to show order and discipline to their soldiers. By having this, Lewis and Clark are always reaffirming that they are the ones in charge giving orders, and it's a way for the soldiers to be reminded of that discipline in camp and on the journey itself. So that is just a quick look at the Espontoon, or half pike, of the expedition. We hope you'll check out other item spotlight videos like this on our Facebook page, our YouTube page, and of course you can always find them at www.campdubois.com. Thanks for watching.